Welcome back to the Digital Graveyard, a place we haven't been since the War of the Worlds, and while I promise that not every game we're going to look at in this series is going to be an exercise in poor IP management, Rocky and Bullwinkle on the Xbox 360 is one of the key games I had in mind when I was first mulling on the idea of plumbing the derelict downloadable depths of the 7th gen. And that's because this game has a really interesting premise that is the perfect example of the experimental spaghetti-at-the-wall thinking you saw back during these early days of the XBLA, when file sizes were laughably small, weird feature demands were put in place by Microsoft, and no one knew quite what to do with this new indie game live arcade model yet. That's because what they did, rather than taking the obvious route of so many licensed games and just shitting out a mediocre 2D platformer, is instead employ the incredibly underused microgame genre, and pairing it with the snappy pace of the 60s J. Ward cartoon classic. Not only did this allow them to build something that's extremely lightweight and suitable for the strange confines those early XBLA games needed to fit, but on paper, it's a perfect match for the source material that would honor and evoke what makes the adventures of Moose and Squirrel so entertaining and unique to this day. Unfortunately though, on paper is exactly where this game should have remained, because in reality it's an exercise in almost everything not to do when adapting an IP. It's also a perfect example of just how lawless those early days of digital titles truly were, in terms of the wide-ranging quality of what was released and promoted as legitimate video games someone might actually want to play. As mentioned, the hook for this game is that it is a WarioWare-style microgame collection, offering up a smorgasbord of character-themed sets of obtuse, tiny gamelets that need to be deciphered and beaten in rapid succession, with an ever-increasing difficulty and pace. It's a depressingly underutilized genre that, when done right, offers up a chaotic but highly concentrated gameplay experience that is all killer, no filler. But to work, it does require extreme, granular consideration of design, and a deceptively high level of polish. While the individual microgames may come across as dead simple, for the whole thing to work, each game needs to be able to seamlessly scale in difficulty and speed, be intuitive but not obvious, precise in how it controls and feels, cleanly flow across both its own 10-second runtime and into the next microgame, and most importantly, be entertaining in at least some small way on its own, divorced from the rest of the collection. Even for these little crumbs of coding and art assets, that's a lot to ask, and it needs to be done consistently across 100 microgames or more, while also then fitting them into a larger framework that turns all those little bites of fun into a full gaming meal. While I have my issues with Nintendo, same as anyone, you can't deny their various internal studios' objective skill as game designers, so it's hardly surprising that they are the ones that really set the standard for the genre, coining the term microgame in the first place, I think, and are one of the few companies out there to successfully engage with it regularly. So, with that really firm foundation of what a microgame collection is and should be and how they should be designed, let's talk about how Rocky and Bullwinkle fails on pretty much all of those fronts, despite ostensibly sharing the exact same structure as Nintendo's genre forebears. Starting off with that all-important seamless scaling, you can sadly see the stitches here very clearly, with the assorted microgames varying wildly when it comes to baseline challenge and complexity, running the gamut for how difficult they get as each show goes on. The pace quickens, and some games, the ones that require nothing more than spinning the stick for example, don't really get much harder at all. On the other hand, some of the games are wildly unintuitive, or rely on sluggish, jerky digital cursors that are hard to get a handle on no matter how much time you have, or how fast things are moving. That alone creates an uneven pace, and things are made even clunkier by the fact that rather than quickly slipping from one game to the next, instead there's a distinct ka-chunk between them as you button through interstitial results and intro screens and wait a second for things to load, it all taking just long enough to kill the all-important rhythm of the microgame flow. And I call it all-important because that flow is really all there could be to this game. There's not much else fundamental here to judge. That's the downside of this genre. A microgame collection is basically a raw, uncut pile of game design, or when it's not executed properly like this, with inconsistent microgames that don't really work together, it's just a heap of problems. And at the root of all these problems is a dramatic lack of polish. Like I said earlier, to make these games work requires an extreme, granular level of care. It simply doesn't feel like there was anywhere close to enough consideration given to each individual microgame, let alone how they fit together, to make those experiences enjoyable, and instead the goal was just to crank out content with no real concrete vision or design philosophy. That lack of vision is easiest to see in what is, funnily enough, the only place you'll find any real cohesion in this game, which is with its rampant reuse of some microgames. Quite often, they just take the same controls and concept of one game, slap in a different character or context, and then just call it a whole new one. I'd say at least a third of the roster is like that. And it's not like there's even that many microgames where such repetition can go under the radar. Each show only has 15 microgames apiece, and to complete a show you have to beat 25 games in a row, 5 of those being the same boss game ramping up, same as WarioWare. So you're guaranteed to see repeats on every run, and notice those same mechanics and assets, we'll get to that, being reused ad nauseum. In fact, speaking of those boss minigames, those are the only parts of this game period that feel like they were playtested and cleaned up in the least. And that's because they would become softlocks if they weren't, as you need to beat them consistently to finish the game in any real sense. Not that there's really much value in finishing this game, as it were, as there isn't any good sort of extrinsic motivation on display here. Finishing a show will at best get you an achievement, displayed with an ugly 3D spinning graphic, after which you'll just get popped back to the show select screen. You do at least earn a higher amount of box tops for finishing a show, which you can use in the in-game store to buy what is, for all intents and purposes, complete and utter garbage. There are a few useful things, an upgrade that gives you an extra life to work with, one that increases the time you have to complete the microgames, and one that gives you more box tops, but the rest are all upgrades that only serve to increase your scores, either globally or in specific shows, all so you can grab a coveted top slot on the Rocky and Bullwinkle XBLA leaderboards. Leaderboards were one of those things that in the early days of the platform, Microsoft demanded all XBLA games had. We saw that in War of the Worlds as well, and most games rightfully put them in as an obligation, but dug them into a menu or something to be ignored, because even back then, nobody cared. Rocky and Bullwinkle is one of the only games I've seen that isn't pinball or an old arcade port to make those leaderboards a major focus. And while I can applaud using all of the tools at your disposal, in this particular case, why would you do that? It's a party game, and one ostensibly for children at that. The real competition is on the couch with you and asking for more apple juice. No one is playing this game with a deep, burning desire to be the world's best Peabody and Sherman pro. But that does bring up an interesting perspective. Looking at this more purely as a simple budget party game, does it have, or did it ever have, any redeeming features on that front? And this is one small area in which I do have to hand it to this game, because while it's still not fun, and if you put it on during a party, no one is coming to your house ever again, it does have a couple of features that, at the time, would have played well to that circumstance. The first is how it handles multiplayer, eschewing the need for extra controllers and instead going for a hot seat arrangement that supports up to 12 players. I do think the pacing is a bit odd for this, having it so players complete 5 game sets in turn, rather than more suitably and frantically passing it around after each microgame, but having a hot seat multiplayer at all, for a game like this, is unreservedly a good idea. The other unique party game-focused feature Rocky and Bullwinkle has, which it will happily throw in your face at every available opportunity, is its support for the Xbox Live Vision camera. If you're on the younger side or just don't remember this bit of undermarketed extra plastic, the Xbox Live Vision Cam was an early 360 camera peripheral pre-Kinect that allowed for some online play shenanigans in most of the scant few games it was used in. For Rocky and Bullwinkle, though, it was instead used in the same way as the iToy for the PS2, allowing for some extremely rudimentary motion controls, letting players control a surprisingly large portion of the microgames via making an ass of themselves. Now, I do not currently have one of these cameras, so I can't speak to how well these controls worked, But just like with a lot of early Wii stuff, which is clearly the market and experience this game is trying to ape here, it doesn't really matter. Any technical quality is secondary when the goal is simply to have something basic that even Grandpa can feasibly pick up and play, which maybe also explains why they chose to go for this particular license, and the camera support plays into that goal. Ultimately though, that intended experience of intergenerational family fun still wouldn't happen, camera or not, because the core experience here just isn't polished and feels bad to play on every level. Adding nascent motion controls delivered via a budget rebranded early aughts webcam isn't going to fix that, and suddenly make this hot mess a viable option for post-Thanksgiving dinner entertainment. For God's sake, I'd rather sit down and have a frank, in-depth family discussion about modern politics than force my kith or kin to sit through even 5 minutes of this dreck. Assuming you've actually been watching this video and not just letting it play on a second monitor, you can already see that the gameplay is far from the only issue here, and that Rocky and Bullwinkle isn't winning any awards in the looks department either. It's not just that it feels off-model from the show, and I'll get into that aspect of things later on, it's that what is here all just feels cheap and inconsistent, the absolute definition of slapped together. To start off with, the animation by and large is disgustingly over-tweened in that Flash style, causing this game to move like something off of Shockwave.com circa 2002. Then there are the character sprites, some of which look fine, maybe barring a missing nose here or there, which to be fair, the show had plenty of as well, but a lot are so rough as to only just barely be recognizable. And it's clear why. They were drawn in such a way so that they could be passably, theoretically, jury-rigged into multiple microgames to save some time drawing them in all those unique scenarios. This then leads to flipper-armed Sherman here and Peabody looking like somebody melted Snoopy. Further lending to my they were cutting corners with a chainsaw hypothesis is how some of these incidental elements look. Like, yeah, it's a castle wall in a 5-second microgame, but come on, they could have done better than this, and that level of quality, or lack thereof, is present throughout the entire game. It's especially noticeable too when they start to incorporate what I can only describe as animated clip art into things. Assets which feel like they must be stocked to some godforsaken free art toolset, because they don't match anything else here, let alone the trademark J. Ward style. They're oddly prominent too, like this vague bug that is put center screen at the end of this microgame and which looks like a child made it. Or this weird random monster that appears before each and every boss minigame, and which also looks like it was drawn by a child. These sorts of bizarre hodgepodge assets are sprinkled all throughout, appearing in most of the microgames, sometimes repeated, because of course they are, and it makes this whole thing feel like a first draft prototype made with placeholders. The worst part of all of this, though, is that they could have justifiably hidden a lot of their rough edges, but chose not to do so. They chose to have all of the art here be sharp and saturated, making it easier to scrutinize. They chose to use this god-awful smoothing on the sprites that looks like it comes straight out of a bad arcade port. They chose to incorporate the odd, flat-shaded 3D model, which looks gross in contrast with everything else, and they chose to put in short clips from the show, which despite being chopped up and 50 years past due at the time, look dramatically better than the rest of the game, even crammed into their teeny-weeny crunchy windows, complete with DVD collection watermarks. And it's with those clips of the show that the easy answer for how to fix the look of this game can be found, which is just by emulating the look of the show. All you would have to do is put a slight blur on it, desaturate the colors, and add a grain filter, giving it that old, fuzzy cartoon rerun style. It's honestly as simple as that. Those extremely basic steps would have obscured things enough that the look of the game overall could have slunk by somewhat, and it would have at least felt more in tune with the source material. And I'm sure there's some devil's advocates / strawmen out there chastising me, saying, how can you act like those easy tricks in your fancy editing suite would translate to the developer's toolset? Clearly, they couldn't have achieved such amazing feats as a basic bitch grain or sepia filter with the near powerless, pitiful Xbox 360. You're speaking out of your ass. To which I retort, I know they could have done it, because they did. for a single microgame and then nowhere else. Oh, I'd love to say, let's move on to something less aggravating and talk about the audio in this game, but honestly, that side of things is just as bad, if not worse. That's because it leans even further into that clip art philosophy, where a solid 80% of everything you hear feels like filler music and effects ripped from the sorts of royalty-free sound libraries you see Humble Bundles shilling every now and again. The remaining 20% is at least audio from the show, but not the bits you would expect or want, and none of it is used with any real sense of coherence or purpose. Starting off with the music, like I said, it is pretty much entirely composed of the most stock fucking tracks you've ever heard. It all feels like mall music circa the late 2000s. None of it is in any way memorable, of course, and a lot of it feels very emotionally discordant with where it's used as well. The credits music is especially guilty of this, with it coming off as almost somber, in what is, I remind you, supposed to be a comedy game. Funnily enough, despite the music, the credits is also the only place in this game where they attempt to make actual jokes and not just throw out poorly conceived sight gags, and it's great to see. They're not funny, but I appreciate the effort. I would have appreciated more, though, if those jokes existed in the game itself, and not in the credits I have to dig 2 menus deep to watch, but honestly we're scraping the bottom here, so I'll take what I can get. I'm getting a bit off track though, so returning to that horrifically inoffensive music I mentioned earlier, its inclusion isn't just a problem here because it's bland, but rather because it sits in place of music they theoretically had rights for that would fit far better. As you'll remember, every show in this game is based on a Rocky and Bullwinkle character, and accordingly, at the start of every show, there is a terribly slapped together little intro where a bunch of clips get plastered on the screen and a 15-second swatch of music plays. You know where else there's character-specific short riffs of music like that? In the actual show, at the start of each segment. Some of the most recognizable theme songs in television history exist within the adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, and staggeringly, this game uses none of it. Instead of the Canadiana glory that is this, you instead, when starting up a Dudley Do-Right show in this game, woefully must suffer through this. I genuinely don't understand why they didn't just use the original intros, or at least just the music. Because it's right there, and so obvious with the framework they've built to use those themes. And I know at least someone on the sound staff was close to getting that too, which is even more aggravating, because just like with the visual style stuff I mentioned earlier, there is an example in this game of them getting close, but still, oh, so far. When you play a Bullwinkle show, you get the actual Rocky and Bullwinkle theme, though it sounds a bit weird because it's clearly been recomposed. And then for the rest of the show, the painfully looped song that keeps playing in an attempt to drive you to the depths of madness has at the very least leitmotifs of that theme.
Hey, that's it, Bullwinkle!
Of course, then you play any other character's show, and you get bad intro music like I already showed, and Drek like this.
It's Sandy Claus!
Also worth noting that right there is just what raw gameplay sounds like in this train wreck. Unsurprisingly, all of the sound in this game is atrociously mixed. The music, sound effects, and voice clips are all fighting each other constantly, and there's no clear winner in the battle as each bit of audio varies wildly in volume. So you have the monotonous music overlapping with the bad stock Foley, overlapping with the out-of-context voice lines, and then underneath all of that is obnoxious audience noise, because this is still in the framework of being a show to play off the concept of the actual show. Speaking of which, in that cacophony of crap, there is a key element missing if you were wanting to do a proper homage to Rocky and Bullwinkle, and that is a narrator.
And so when our heroes came to the sign, they turned left toward the sawmill, and a moment later the stillness was broken by a hideous sound. Have our friends really run into more than they can handle? Don't miss our next episode, 2 for the Ripsaw, or Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
You do get an out-of-context voice clip here and there, but it's lacking any sense of ongoing narration like the original show had, which is really what held that show together. It was like half puns and wordplay after all. Admittedly, I don't know how you cleanly fit active and presumably procedural narration of that sort into a party game like this, so I can't dock them for not having it. But this does kind of get to the root of why this game leaves such a bad taste in my mouth, which is that even if some art and design changes were made that turn this into an amazing, or even serviceable set of microgames, it would still, at its core, be a terrible Rocky and Bullwinkle game. To be fair, Rocky and Bullwinkle as a license overall is a bit of a strange one, and I get why it would be difficult to adapt. The show had a very staccato pace and scattered identity after all, flitting between plot lines and characters and even art style to a certain degree, with the connective tissue that brought it all together being the snappy writing and the voice performances, which often kept to era-appropriate broad vaudevillian impressions.
So you see, we gotta get Bullwinkle back.
But why should the Weather Bureau help you, Rocky?
Because Bullwinkle's bunion can tell you when it's gonna rain.
It can?
Yeah.
Then he's a valuable national asset. Get me the White House. Hello? Hello?
Tea? Oh, I never thought of tea, of course. Tea. Sugar, 2 spoons. Just 2 spoons, thank you, yes. Damn, I forgot all about Chip. Just shows you what a place.
Now, I'll have a good bit of faux-ed win as much as anybody else, but how to turn that into compelling gameplay is a damn tricky question. And as such, there are low expectations to meet to be considered faithful in adapting a show like The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. And this game fails to meet even those. I've already covered the frankly egregious lack of the series' staple musical themes, the desert of comedy that is this game's clip art visual gags, and the ugly visual style that looks like the result of someone poorly tracing the characters on the TV screen, but it goes beyond that. Specifically with how, surface level, a lot of the references and just their understanding of the property seems to be. Now, I don't have an exhaustive knowledge of Rocky and Bullwinkle. I grew up watching it via decades-late reruns like most people my age, but in rewatching the show as I've been writing this script, I quickly noticed that almost all of the things they reference are from the first couple of seasons. Perhaps there are some scant few later run callbacks present that I just don't recognize, but the majority of what I saw in this game I could very quickly pin as being from Season 1, with even their whole box top thing that they've built their upgrade system on being just a gag from the end of that season that isn't really consequential in any way, but then there being a bunch of Season 2 gags here and there to kind of flesh things out. While there's nothing outwardly wrong with that, it does make this whole thing come off like they were trying to put in just enough effort to make a passing grade and be able to sneak this by the license holders. Especially considering how basic and then reused a lot of the individual mechanics are for the microgames, it feels as though they had already started designing a party game of this sort on their own to try and get in on this whole newfangled XBLA business, and then 80% of the way there, they snagged their rights and had to put up a quick and convincing facade. That is, of course, entirely speculation on my part, but that is what this game feels like, rather than a project that was approached with any real sense of passion for the source material. I could be wrong, maybe the whole team at Zen were old, die-hard members of the Rocky and Bullwinkle fan club, but if so, that's not present in their work here, nor in how this game uses that source material. I mean, hell, even the actual clips of the show itself, the easiest out for bringing some authenticity into a game like this, are de-emphasized down to little, soundless 5-second snippets, not even attached to the microgames that are playing, and used essentially as nothing more than wallpaper, rather than giving it any sense of actual fanfare or reverence. Corny as it might sound, there just doesn't feel like there's any genuine love or respect here for Rocky and Bullwinkle. And to make a good adaptation of any kind, you need to have that to at least some degree for the property that you're adapting. Accordingly, this game does not feel like a product for fans of the show, as it's wholly missing and misunderstanding that core of what people actually liked about that program. And if anything, it feels more like an insult to those who would dare to care about Moose and Squirrel. And well, yeah, dedicated original fans would have been slim on the gaming ground given the fact that The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle originally aired in 1959. That doesn't mean there wasn't an audience to be insulted, as it spent decades in syndication, including, as mentioned, when I was a kid in the 90s. In fact, there was a massive resurgence of Rocky and Bullwinkle stuff around that time, which, given I'm sick of talking about this goddamn game, let's take a few minutes to talk about that instead, as well as what presence our mid-century woodland duo had in gaming prior to the release of this steaming pile. Starting off with that prior gaming experience, there have been surprisingly few digital outings for this franchise. There was the requisite NES-era platformer, of course. I'm pretty sure every cartoon ever made had one of those, and yeah, it's about what you'd expect. If you want to hear someone tear into it, AVGN did an episode on it about a decade back, so go watch that. But yeah, it's unsurprisingly a dead simple MS Paint looking mess with bit-crushed music loops that were composed with malicious intent. It was published by THQ, and in the style of the day, there were also SNES, Genesis, and Game Boy versions a year later that are all notably different from the NES game, all looking better and sounding a little less nightmarish, but still being exactly the sort of low-effort licensed stuff you'd expect from the era. That said, I will give it to them that across all the different versions, they do make an attempt to bring in some of the writing style from the show. The intro of these games especially apes the repartee between the characters and the narrator that you get in a classic episode really well, and does give the proceedings at least a little bit of that Rocky and Bullwinkle flavor, before it descends into just being a rote platformer. Aside from that, the only other major video game appearance they made before this 2008 XBLA outing we've been suffering through is a PC-only trivia game made 10 years prior called Rocky and Bullwinkle's Know-It-All Quiz Game. Like those earlier console titles, it's very much what you would expect, especially if you grew up during the boom of PC edutainment software in the 90s. It's a somewhat choppily animated, bog-standard trivia affair with enough flair to cover up how simple it actually is, and featuring questions that are challenging enough to keep most players engaged. It's not Jeopardy or anything, but it's not baby's first quiz game either. Additionally, all of the regular Rocky and Bullwinkle voice actors from that era reprise their roles for it, so you get that extra little bit of authenticity as they play around between questions, even if the game overall can't escape feeling a bit rough and cheap as most of this kind of software did back then. And at this point, you might be asking why there were Rocky and Bullwinkle games at all during this time, given how dated the show would have been even then. And the answer is because, as mentioned, it was going through a bit of a revival. That's because throughout the 80s and 90s, the old show was relicensed for syndication by a number of different networks, bringing it to a new generation, and alongside that came a bunch of projects and appearances to capitalize on this newfound interest in the series. There were commercials for Taco Bell, Energizer, and Target, there was a tie-in line of Sody Pop, and of course there were stacks of VHS tapes, with the episodes being released piecemeal by Disney's Buena Vista label. As you can imagine, with Disney being involved, movies were sure to follow, and as such there were also a number of live-action attempts to bring the works of Jay Ward to the big screen during this time as well. The most obvious and poorly received one of these would be The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle from the year 2000, featuring the duo brought to life in Turn of the Millennium CGI that didn't look great then and hasn't aged well since. That said, it's a fun enough little road comedy that is chock full of cameos, and Jason Alexander as Boris Badenov is inspired casting. It's one of those movies that I've since shown to my kid, and he enjoyed it well enough, so mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned. Prior to that, there was a Dudley Do-Right movie in '99 and George of the Jungle in '97, both being Brendan Fraser vehicles during the height of his early popularity. Side note on that, while George of the Jungle isn't actually part of The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, that show is from the same team, at the same time, and in the same style as Rocky and Bullwinkle, so it fits in well when talking about this era of J. Ward revivalism. Of the two, the Disney-produced George of the Jungle was definitely the better film, and the box office numbers firmly agree on that, with it being a classic bit of 90s comedy that absolutely still holds up to this day. But I have a special place in my heart for the Universal-made Dudley Do-Right movie as well. I always love some outright goofy, hokey Canadiana, which that film does relatively well, as you can imagine, and it has a fun script with a little bit of meta-humor regarding the vaudeville good guy, bad guy dynamic that really fits the source material perfectly. It's also wonderfully cast. Brendan Fraser kills it as Dudley Do-Right, and Alfred Molina's Snidely Whiplash is just devouring scenery in the most mustache-twirlingly perfect way. But these are all films that you've likely heard of. I don't need to go into depth. After all, they're major studio productions that, even if they were mostly commercial failures, were certainly well marketed and wouldn't have slipped under the radar. But there is another. Originally intended for theaters, but instead aired on Showtime in 1992 before quietly shuffling off to a home video release stuck in rental store purgatory, we got Boris and Natasha. This was an action romance comedy done in the Zucker Brothers style, focusing entirely on everyone's favorite no-goodness, as they take on a secret mission that sees them faking their defection to the United States and interacting with the height of human achievement that is late 80s American pop culture. It's also cast floor to ceiling with classic character actors, such as Alex Rocco and Sid Haig, alongside SCTV alums, specifically John Candy, Andrea Martin, and most notably Dave Thomas in the title role. If you're like me, that description alone has already sold you on this film, but sadly there are reasons it didn't make it to theaters and fell out of the public consciousness. Key among them would be that the plot is quite flabby near the middle, the jokes have about a 50-50 hit rate, and most tragically of all, Dave Thomas does a terrible job as Boris. I don't know why, we know he can be funny, we know he can do voices, but he doesn't quite manage to make things work with that character. He plays Boris as largely irritable and serious, rather than having fun with it, and being more playful and sleazy, which would have been truer to the Pottsylvanian saboteur. Boris and Natasha aren't just the antagonists of Rocky and Bullwinkle after all, they're rotten to the core bad guys, and they absolutely revel in that to a theatrical degree, which is something that Thomas's take on Boris lacks. Even worse, though, is that Dave can't seem to maintain the classic Boris voice, more or less abandoning it by the end, which is pretty shocking given that it's an impression that anyone can do.
It's that simple, just do basic stereotypical Russian accent, pinch your words at front and throw some wabbayus in there, and that's all it takes to being Boris bad enough in the Teshifital, top spice of rock state of Pennsylvania. And while I'm having some fun here, Bullwinkle is easy to do too. Just speak through your nose and push all your words to the front of your mouth, then add a hint of a lisp and a bit of a Midwestern twang. After all, Frostbite Falls is in Minnesota, don't you know?
Being serious though, if some asshole like me can do those, even passingly, then I expect better of the great Doug McKenzie.
Take off.
That being said, Sally Kellerman on the other hand does a fantastic job as Natasha, both nailing the voice and the general attitude, and she absolutely steals the show, appropriately picking up Boris's slack. And funnily enough, that's kind of what the movie is ultimately about and what makes it so interesting and unique. Underneath the gags, it's a high-concept examination of the relationship between the two of them. It's still primarily a comedy, of course, but that extra layer of subtext really does add some interesting needed texture, and moreover, it shows a consideration and appreciation of the original source material, as the nature of Boris and Natasha's strange relationship is one of those long-time fan questions. And there are lots of other nice, respectful touches involved as well, such as the ever-present fourth wall-breaking narrator, references to Frostbite Falls and other series staples, and even a cameo from the legendary June Foray, the original Natasha, and also the voice of Rocky and pretty much every other female character on the old show. Overall, Boris and Natasha is not the best movie I've ever seen, but it is a very solid 7 out of 10, and a surprisingly fun watch if you're a fan of this franchise. Frankly, I was flabbergasted that I had never even heard of it prior to doing research for this video, but at the very least, it's nice to come away from a terrible game with a solid movie recommendation. Speaking of which, we should wrap things up. Much as I love going on pointless tangents, that discussion just now about other adaptations of Rocky and Bullwinkle did have a purpose, and that was to showcase the passion that this game is missing. You see, all of those other attempts to do something new with Frostbite Falls' favored sons had at least some clear sense of love behind it. Even that low-effort NES game went above and beyond by having a dueling title gag for every level, which is a smidgen of extra effort they didn't need to add for what is ultimately third-gen shovelware. Rocky and Bullwinkle XBLA, on the other hand, feels completely and utterly devoid of that love. Sure, it has more references than those other games, perhaps, but nothing here feels like it was done with any sense of care that would come from working with characters and material that they truly gave a shit about. And this isn't just about having respect for an ancient cartoon show. You see that lack of passion or polish throughout the entirety of the experience. I've already droned on plenty about the lazy presentation and game design, which ties right into that, so there's no need to beat that particular dead horse any harder, but if there's one specific moment in this game that shows what I'm talking about here, just take a look at what happens near the end of any show. As you wrap up that last set of microgames, just before you do the boss again, you get a quick, simple bonus stage to grab some last-minute extra score points. And yes, that's what they're called. This game is basically your 98-year-old grandmother who thinks anything with buttons is a Nintendo. But it's not a bonus stage. It's bonus stag. And no, that's not a pun. Not as far as I can tell. There are no deers or soon-to-be husbands in this level. It's just vaguely space-themed. So that means that's a spelling error. A really simple and obvious one, and somehow they never fixed it. I guarantee you they knew about it. It shows up at the end of every show, and even the most rudimentary of QA testing would have caught it, but who cares? Clearly not the devs, because as cruel as it may sound to say, this game just feels like a cash grab at best. I mean, hell, just take a look at this list of features for the game on its old website, long since taken down, of course. It reads like something used to pitch investors, or stakeholders, not players, and certainly not fans of the show. After all, it's hard to convince people you're a starry-eyed, innocent enthusiast of the property when you unironically refer to it as IP, in your marketing material no less, making it look like you're trying to sell NFTs 10 years too early. There is a silver lining at least, in that the developer, Zen Studios, does seem to have grown a lot since the release of this game in 2008. While they've put out a bunch of different original titles in that time, for the most part they've focused on their endeavors in the digital pinball space with their Pinball Effects / Zen Pinball titles, which they do seem to actually care about. And they've kept up with the licensing work as well, putting out tables for things as varied as Marvel and Star Wars, to Peanuts and Garfield, to South Park and Family Guy, to the games of Bethesda and Gearbox, and all manner of other pop culture and gaming franchises in between. They've even locked in the rights for Bally and Williams, making them the de facto current purveyor of classic pinball tables. Now, I'll be honest, as a pinball fanatic myself, I don't actually love their versions of those tables, and much of their pinball design philosophy overall, but my take on the larger digital pinball scene is a topic for another video. What matters is that the level of quality and care they've put into these arcade efforts is in stark contrast to what we saw in Rocky and Bullwinkle XBLA, and I'm never going to put down a developer for genuinely improving over time. Also, as a fun fact, just to get things back on track, they actually put out a Rocky and Bullwinkle pinball table as well for the original Pinball Effects just a couple of weeks before this XBLA game released, making full use of that license while they had it. Perhaps unsurprisingly, after everything we've talked about in this video, it's probably one of their weaker tables in my opinion, even for the time, with underwhelming gimmicks, flat visual design, and ramps that tend to feed the drain more easily than they really should. It's still better quality overall than the nightmare that is the Microgame collection, but only so much as to make it inoffensive rather than actively insulting like its sister effort. And on that note, and to wrap things up, obviously I can't recommend Rocky and Bullwinkle for the Xbox Live Arcade. Not that it matters, as even before the store closure, it had long since been delisted, I believe. At the very least, it was a cheaper game at the time, launching at only 800 Microsoft Funbucks, which converted as 10 real-world dollars. But even that feels atrociously overpriced for what you actually got. Outside of 2 Microgames and fooling around with the Xbox Live Vision Cam stuff, I saw everything this game had to offer in my short 3 hours with it, and that's with me stopping to take a lot of disappointed angry notes. So, yeah, there's no gem hiding underneath all of this rough. Even if you're the most die-hard Rocky and Bullwinkle fan ever to exist, trust me that there's no reason to try and hunt this game down. In fact, if you're going to take anything from this video, it should be something positive, and to go watch that Boris and Natasha movie. If you're looking for a fresh hit of classic Rocky and Bullwinkle fun that you've likely not seen, then you could do far worse. And it's on Tubi, so it's not even like it's hard to find. Well, that was definitely a longer video than I expected to make for a slipshod collection of microgames, but I suppose I covered far more than just that. Not that I'm complaining, because really, when else am I going to get the chance to do a deep dive into Rocky and Bullwinkle of all things? It certainly took a bit more effort to put together than I was expecting, but thankfully I still managed to stay on schedule and get this out in a decent time frame. For this channel's standards at least. Which is good, because I suspect the next video is going to take a bit. As promised, the next main video will still be the Bureau XCOM Declassified, the winner of the last coming soon vote, and progress is steadily being made on that review. At the time of publishing for this video, I've already finished playing through it again and doing note work, parsing through all of my footage and speccing out the script. That said, there's more to that game than I remembered, and I ended up taking a lot of notes, so I expect it will end up being one of my longer videos and is gonna take some time in the oven. As such, I might do another Blight video like this one, probably at Cult Recommendations, before that XCOM one is done and published, but we'll see. Beyond all that though, I am excited to reveal that the supporter stuff I talked about at the end of the last coming soon video is now ready for anyone wanting to throw a couple of bucks my way and support the channel. I'll have a post up on the channel community tab explaining things in more detail, and you'll be able to find that on my Ko-Fi page as well, but the short version is that I've set up 3 tiers of membership costing $1, $5, and $10 respectively. Everyone who puts in at least $1 will get access to a monthly podcast that I'll be publishing towards the end of each month, where I'll cover my current production progress on upcoming videos, talk about whatever non-channel games I'm playing at the time, and answer questions if people feel like sending them in. At higher tiers, supporters will also get access to a Trello board showing more detailed progress on what I'm working on, as well as my overall list of games pegged for potential future videos. And then, at the very top tier, you'll get the special and/or dubious honor of being listed here in the credits. I know that's kind of backwards from how most channels do it, but I really wanted to let as many people as possible enjoy that podcast, as well as keep my credits from becoming a big mess of scrolling names. Those memberships aside, it's worth noting that Ko-Fi also has the option for one-off tips. So if you don't want to do monthly but still want to kick in some pocket change to say thanks for the videos, you're covered too. Of course, if you don't want to put any money in at all, or more pressingly can't afford to, then please, don't. The goal here is not to move the channel into a walled garden. It's simply to allow those with the means and desire to do so to support the channel. My regular content will always remain free, and I will always appreciate just seeing the views and likes and comments from you all, so don't feel any obligation to put $1 in the jar if it doesn't make sense for you. Anyways, I've rambled on more than long enough. Thanks for watching, hopefully you enjoyed this sadly disappointing trip to Frostbite Falls, and as always, have a good one.